good. We are live on Clubhouse. All right, let me move this one here, and we're live. Lara, here we are. So
hello, buongiorno.
Buongiorno, Lara. You were studying acting when you met Massimo the first time.
So Massimo and I met in 1993, and we met in a little cafe. I was behind the counter making cappuccinos, pretty bad cappuccinos, and serving wine, and he was in the kitchen. But the reason that I was working in that cafe was because I was sort of between wanting to become an actress, wanting to work in the art world. I was working at a photography magazine called Aperture. I was taking acting classes and auditioning all over the city. And between those two, someone had to bring, I had to pay my rent. And so I ended up in this little cafe on the corner of Grant and Mercer. It no longer exists, but it was called Caffè di Nonna, run by Ray Costantini. Ray Costantini was this retired third generation Calabrian hairdresser. He had made a good amount of money being a hairdresser on the Upper East Side, Upper West Side. He bought a building in Soho in the 1970s, a beautiful brick building. But among all of his friends, he was the guy who cooked at the dinner parties. And so all of his friends said, Ray, when are you going to open a restaurant? You should really open a restaurant, Ray. And so Ray retires and says, you know what? I'm going to open a restaurant. And so on the ground floor of this beautiful building, he opens this adorable cafe on the corner. Across the street was a Yoshi Yamamoto shop. Down the street was, it was Jeffrey Deitch Gallery. It was the beginning of when Soho was turning into something more than just an artist quarters, but it also started to become more commercial. And it was called Caffè di Nonna. And Ray was in the kitchen.
Wait, I have immediately two questions. First, were you studying like at actor studio or just taking private classes, or what kind of?
I was taking classes. I can't remember the name of the theater group. Wasn't as famous as Actor Studio. Basically, I took it after work. I'd finish work and I'd go to my acting classes. But, as a kid, I always loved to do musicals and sing and things like that. And then I never really took it seriously. But when I got to New York, I started hanging out with a lot of avant-garde artists. And I would go often to the Wooster Group. I had friends who were working there. And so there was this whole kind of vibe. I wasn't thinking about acting in terms of Hollywood or Broadway, but I loved the synergy between fine art, acting, off Broadway, and provoking people, basically. And so that's where my acting career, that's what I was interested in. But I'm not a very good actress. I found out I'm not a very good actress, but I'm a really good waitress. I mean, that's how I met my husband. I've been waiting tables almost all my life just to support whatever artistic endeavor I wanted to do. And so, sometimes my mother would say, I can't believe I sent you to college, to wait tables.
But how did it go? Massimo entered Caffè di Nonna. And
so the story is this. Ray Costantini.
The real story, Lara, not the legend, the real story.
The real story. Ray Costantini opens up Caffè di Nonna after a beautiful renovation. So you have to imagine corner building, all the light coming through, tin ceilings, original tin ceilings. We have this small cafe, open kitchen, gorgeous walnut, very long bar for cappuccino, muffins, coffee, wine bar, but everything's open. So my friend who was working in the Wooster Group said, and I was taking an acting class with him, said, I just got a job waiting tables at this little cafe in Soho. And it was 2 blocks down from the Wooster Group. And so he said, they're looking for someone to stay behind the bar. And I said, well, I know how to make a cappuccino. I've spent time in Italy. I had cousins living in Italy. I had studied art history in Italy. I had this total passion for Italy. So I said, why not? Let me try to, get an interview. And so Ray had probably opened the restaurant in January. And he was very ambitious because he was open from the early morning until quite late at night. And it was basically just him. And so the guy was exhausted. You know, after 3 months, I walked in mid-March to apply for a job in the afternoon, and had a quick interview with him and his wife, Maggie, who is a writer. And I told them that I spoke a little Italian, I could make a cappuccino, I knew stuff about wine. When I say stuff about wine, I wasn't really a sommelier, but my first job when I was 16 years old, before I could even buy a bottle of wine, was working in a wine shop. That was the only job I could get. And since I was an art student, I was pretty good at drawing. And so I would do all the sort of decorative drawings in the wine section, you know, grapevines and castles and things like that. And so I learned about wine through working in this local wine shop. And so I could talk about things, whether I actually knew them or not. I had the ability to explain them. Somehow I got that job. I walked back to my little apartment in the East Village, and on my answering machine, there was a message: "Hi, this is Ray Costantini, and you know, if you can start tomorrow, you can come in at 5 o'clock after your other job, and we'd love to have you on the team." And so that's the way things used to go. You know, no CV, no cell phone.
Straight in, immediately in. And so you start to work in, and one day Massimo walk in the restaurant.
No, Marco, it's more serendipitous than that. Massimo literally passed through that same cafe on the same day, just at a different time, like 3 hours earlier than I did. He was walking in Soho. He was living in Soho. He was living in New York City, excuse me. He was living on the Upper West Side with his girlfriend at the time, Katia. And basically he had woken up January 1993 after 9 years of cooking at Trattoria del Campazzo in the countryside, about 10 kilometers from where we are now at Casa Mirdaluigia, about 10 kilometers from downtown Modena, in this little trattoria, which was not even in Nonantola. It was in a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a town. So basically there was the trattoria, the bus stop, and Caseificio, a cheesemaker. And the trattoria was everything. It was where you get your bus ticket, is where you get your tabaccaria, your cigarettes, where you get a coffee. And Massimo had began this adventure in 1986. And with great success, he basically found out who he was, his identity, his calling. He filled in the shoes of a restaurateur and a chef and grew. And that little hamlet of a town became known by everyone because it was where not only his friends were hanging out on the weekends and dining, but where he actually really had an opportunity to begin introducing a whole generation of Modenese to wine, to food, to new ideas, culinary ideas. But he woke up on January 1st, 1993, typical Modenese landscape as he described it, very gray, very foggy. And he thought to himself, I think I need to get out and see the world a little bit. I think I need to go and have some more experiences. To sum it up, he had come to a crossroads, and everything that he had experienced up to that moment was leading to him jumping into something new. And he felt that he just needed new stimulus. And so he was able to convince Katia, his girlfriend, to take a temporary sabbatical leave from her job. She's an interior designer, and they moved to New York.
Okay.
No job, no future, no plans. Just let's move to New York.
Live the life and experience. Okay.
Exactly. So that was January, and 3 months into the game, he was starting to get very restless because Massimo, as you know, because I know that you interviewed Massimo, is a volcanic person, a guy who just, you know, he needs something to do and to think about or to listen to and activities. And so by March, he was walking around Soho. And he saw on Grand Street this sign that said Ili Cafe. Right. And he said, oh, okay, I'm going to get a good coffee there. Let me stop in. It's really cute. And he went into the cafe and sat down and looked at all the details as a restaurateur would, ordered the coffee. And I think it took him 15 minutes to get a coffee, looked at the menu and thought, wow, this place has amazing potential. but nothing much is happening right now. Let's see, maybe I can talk to the owner. Maybe this would be a good place for me to be the chef, because it wasn't a big fancy Michelin restaurant, didn't have waiters running around. It was very easy and very low key. And I think Massimo felt that he could, slip in there and all of a sudden become somebody or something on that corner of Grand and Mercer. And in fact, he did. He asked if the manager was there, and Ray Costantini, of course, exhausted, was down in the basement sleeping on the wine cases. And here comes this, handsome, Massimo at the time had this mustache, goatee, curly brown hair, Italian accent, but spoke English really well. And he comes along and he says, Ray, I'm just looking for a part-time job. I'm a chef from Emilia Romagna, tortellini, tortelloni, tagliatelle ragu. And I think just those 3 words, tagliatelle, tortellini, tortelloni. And Ray was like, oh my God, my savior has come, my prince on his white horse. And by the time Massimo got back to his apartment on the Upper West Side, of course, on the answering machine was Ray Costantini, can you come in for the afternoon, evening shift? And so we literally basically walked through the door at the same time the next day.
Right. Okay. I thought he was a client. He came to work there.
No. He came to work there. And the fact that this place was had the open kitchen with a counter, and I was behind the other counter, we were always looking at each other and laughing and making jokes. And I would sort of show him my cappuccino, and he'd be like, oh God, it's terrible. Come on. He'd come behind the bar and give me some cappuccino lessons. And we just formed a group of friends. You know how New York is, especially in the 90s. There were actors, there were writers, there were film producers. Everyone was waiting tables. Everyone was in the restaurant industry, because that was the way you could make, a little bit of money, meet interesting people, and kind of live your dream until you had actually made it.
Yeah. Lara, I love, by the way, I'm so curious about talking about Food for Soul, but I was so curious about this, the beginning, because it's incredible to see the journey that you and Massimo have done. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that, you see people who has incredible success, but what happened before? How many years it took to get there, and people think, it's maybe easy. No, it's not easy. There are years that I imagine, with a roller coaster of experiences, and so I always like this part of the journey, because the people want the result, but they don't want to put the effort into it to get the final result. So I think it's interesting.
I think the journey is everything. It's what makes you who you are. I have a 24-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old son, and I keep trying to tell them, don't get caught up in, thinking too much about what you're going to become. Keep living the moment that you're living in, because that is what's creating your future. Your actual experiences that you have, and opportunities that come up, and serendipitous events like meeting Massimo, or the fact that, the reason I even could speak Italian, or the reason that I had already fallen in love with Italy, was because I didn't get along with my French teacher in 10th grade. I mean, we just didn't get along, and he wanted to fail me at all costs. And so the only thing I could do to spite him was to take Italian. And I had this radical cousin, American cousin, who was living in Italy and had married an Italian. And she was like my idol. And I thought, someday I want to move to Italy and marry a cute Italian. His name is Bruno. And I was like, I want to marry a Bruno. So I'm going to learn Italian. And there you go. I don't have any Italian blood. I don't have any Italian relatives. I didn't at that time. And, life is so crazy. I discovered through Italy that I loved art, that I loved culture, literature, history. So everyone's course is different sometimes because of the things that didn't go right, or the things that, weren't working properly. I couldn't make it as an actress, so I was waiting tables. I wasn't paid enough at my job in the art world. And so I was waiting tables, but that's how I met Massimo. So after we met, we had a really fun time. Katia became a good friend, and Italians came over from Italy to visit him in New York. And so I got to meet this whole group of people. And by the end of the summer, it was time for him to go back to Italy. He had a restaurant, the Trattoria del Campazzo was being run by his partner. He had a kind of a disco bar club that was being run by other partners. And without Massimo, those two projects weren't going quite as well as they had been going. And so everyone was calling him back, even his mother.
Oh, yeah, but that's a
even
classic.
His mother, Maria Luigia, also known as Nonna Luisa, she came to New York in August, pretty much to say, Max, I think it's time you come back home. I think everyone was terrified that he wasn't going to come home, that he was going to live in Italy, in New York forever. But Massimo is a really responsible guy. So we went back to Italy, and I missed him terribly. I missed the friends that I had met. I missed speaking Italian. And so I decided to go and surprise him for his birthday, which is at the end of September.
Right.
And basically I never left. There you go.
Crazy story. I'm thinking that Massimo obviously has a very unfair advantage, I would say, if he wants to, invite someone. If you say, Lara, can I invite you for a quick lunch or dinner? That's an unfair advantage because then he can, prepare something that it will make you ecstatic, So, but it's an incredible story. And when did you decide then to go into this journey for the Michelin star and create a great restaurant? It was an immediate thought, or it just came along the way?
I think in Massimo's mind, he always had this. Okay, from the first time I met Massimo, behind the counter of Caffè di Nonna, a nothing restaurant, a cafe in the middle of, Soho. He was already Massimo Bottura. I think he was born Massimo Bottura. He had this, what I mean is he had this sense of, I am somebody and I have something to say and I have an opinion about things. And when you talk about food, let me tell you what I think, because, you might find it interesting. So he was already Massimo. He was already the sense of, okay, I arrive at Caffè di Nonna and I see the menu, and he said, well, why don't we do something different? It's artichokes are in season. We're gonna make an artichoke soup, and that artichoke soup, everyone in the 4-block radius was talking about his artichoke soup. So he always had that inside of him. And I think part of the reason that he felt he had to leave Trattoria del Campazzo was that he felt that place, that physical place, would never be able to get the Michelin star. Maybe today things are different, but back in the 90s, it was much harder for a small trattoria, not fancy, in the middle of nowhere, to get a Michelin star. And so he came back to Modena with this idea that he needed to continue his journey. In October, I arrived in September. In October, he had a visit by Alain Ducasse, who was coming to look at some different acetai for balsamic vinegar. And so Alain Ducasse heard about Trattoria del Campazzo and made a reservation for lunch.
Right.
Of course, Massimo was over the moon. Massimo had read everything about Alain Ducasse. Alain Ducasse at that moment was the chef who had 3 stars in Monte Carlo, 3 stars in Paris. He was the first chef to really start talking about farm to table, about the value of ingredients, the artisan producers, terroir, and making terroir trendy. And Massimo was very influenced by him. And so Ducasse came to the restaurant. I will never forget it because I was in Modena. I didn't have a car. I just had a mountain bike. And he was missing some olive oil, particular olive oil. So he sent me to the Enoteca. I put the olive oil in my backpack. I got on the bike and rode that 12 kilometers to bring the olive oil. And he served this beautiful lunch for Alain Ducasse that was very humble and all about terroir products. He had the res d'orda making the pasta behind in the kitchen in view of Alain Ducasse's table. And so Massimo was communicating to Ducasse that this is who he was and this was his kitchen. And he received an invitation to come and cook and learn and be part of the team of Ducasse in Monte Carlo. And so I had just arrived in Modena, and 1 month later, Massimo was packing up his suitcase and his car and the tagliere in the back of the Saab, and he was leaving for Monte Carlo. So in a way, I was crushed because I thought maybe I was coming to Modena when we were going to start a life together, and it just didn't seem like that was going to happen. But on the other hand, I'm thankful now because I had time to decide if I really wanted to live in Italy and learn the language and started working. And then Massimo worked for Ducasse for almost a year.
But did you follow him in Monte Carlo or not?
No. I stayed in Modena. I stayed in Modena. I mean, you know, we weren't really together. It was more of a friendship. It was more of a mutual sharing of ideas, but nothing was solidified. And then the summer came along, and a good friend of Massimo's told him that a restaurant in the center of Modena was up for sale. Just called him, like out of the blue. And Massimo came to Modena, looked at the restaurant in Via Stella. It was called Osteria Francescana, and it had been there since the turn of the century. Had gone through all different owners and things like that. And I think at that moment, he realized that it was time to come back. He had learned so much from Ducasse. He had worked at the Louis Cannes. He had worked at the Grill. He had worked at different aspects. He had absorbed the culture of farm to table and artisan cooking. He had learned some more techniques. But more than anything, I think what he got from Ducasse was a sense of he knew who he was in the middle of all those other chefs, in the middle of, you know, that haute cuisine, French cuisine. He could maintain his identity as an Italian chef. And I think he learned that there's value in that. Instead of saying, I have to cook French, I can be proud to be cooking tortellini, making tagliatelle, and thinking about the ingredients from my landscape. And so he bought the restaurant.
So he told you, let's do it together. What did he say then?
Well, it was kind of assumed that we would work on it together, but it was really his project. And not until we actually opened the restaurant, which was a year later, so March 1995, I had to be in New York. I couldn't be there for the opening of the restaurant. My dad had Parkinson's, and so I had to fly back. He was having an operation. And Massimo called me, 8 in the morning. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Italy. And of course, 8 in the morning, you're not married, you don't have kids, you know, you're still asleep. So I basically got out of bed and picked up the phone. My mother, Massimo's on the phone. My mother adores Massimo. You know, he always plays that sort of, oh, I'll make you lunch, Janet. Oh, should we organize a dinner party together? And so my mom is like,
that's the unfair advantage.
He does have an advantage with the mother-in-law. Anyway, so he called me at 8 in the morning, and I had not even drunk my coffee. And he said, I'm opening the restaurant. I'm sorry you're not here, but will you marry me?
What?
So,
Like that?
Yeah, of course, I'm like, what? You know, what? I didn't even know what to say. I wasn't prepared. I said, Massimo, I haven't even had my coffee yet. Can I call you back? But he knew that was a yes. And years later, I realized that basically he was asking me to marry the restaurant. He asked me to marry the restaurant.
Yeah,
we got married 3 months later. And I think that was the beginning of, are you going to marry this project? You know, it really was. It was that, you know, are you in or are you out? Are you in this with me? Are we doing this together? This is going to be our life. Are you ready? You know, in his very Massimo way. Massimo's not a guy who's going to like explain it to you and sit down and have the tete-a-tete and go, you know, he's just going to throw it out at you and say, are you in? Are we doing this? And so I was in, and that's been the game, you know. I mean, it's like you.
And did it succeeded immediately or not?
No.
Right.
I mean, success has taken a very long time. Let's just say the restaurant opens. We're in the center of Modena, and everyone is expecting that he's going to be doing the kitchen of Trattoria del Campazzo. Really delicious, really fun trattoria, a little bit, elevated trattoria, somewhat gourmet trattoria, but sort of easygoing and Emilian food. But Massimo, his experience in New York, his experience with Ducasse, he's in the center of Modena. He's already thinking about getting a Michelin star, and he wants to be a provocateur. So he opens his menu with a cappuccino of potatoes and puri with balsamic vinegar on top in a cappuccino cup. And of course, the guests are like, what? What is this? Can't we have, what one of his classic dishes is, rigatoni with salsiccia and peas? And he's trying to do something totally different. We put some art on the walls. We put some contemporary art on the walls. Back in Trattoria del Campazzo, he had like a poster of Bruce Springsteen. So this is like, it took a really long time for the Modenese public to sort of say, okay, you're not doing that same kitchen. When he served his tortellini, he was serving 6 tortellini that were walking on the broth. I tortellini camminano su brodo. He wanted to talk about the value of each tortellino and the flavor and the ingredients. Whereas Modenese, of course, are used to this big bowl full of tortellini and it's steaming and you're back in your grandmother's kitchen, even though they're going to tell you that the tortellini of their grandmother are better than your tortellini at Osteria Francescana. So Massimo was provoking people, and the 6 tortellini did not get good reviews, nor did the cappuccino, nor did the 5 ages of Parmigiano. So the first years, every dish that would come out was worse than, there were fantastic dishes. There's some of our iconic dishes today. Much of the public, this was like blasphemy. What are you doing to the Italian kitchen? What are you doing to Parmigiano Reggiano? How can you, treat tortellini in that way? And so every year that went by, it was sort of like, we didn't get the Michelin star that year. And he'd come up with another amazing dish, and it was like, that didn't get the Michelin star either. But then in 2001,
wait, it's true that once you got horrible reviews, both the food and the art?
And the art, exactly. So, we opened in 1995. By 2001, we hadn't gotten any Michelin star. Some sort of avant-garde magazines outside of Italy had started talking about Massimo. And then he gets this terrible review. The review is for a painting by an artist named Gianmarco Montesano, and the painting was of a Ferrari with Gilles Villeneuve driving it, and this curve, and so it was kind of blurry, and everything was distorted, and it was this red-on-red canvas in the middle of the dining room. And the reviewer had talked about how ridiculous and obvious it was that a restaurant in Modena would have a big red Ferrari painting, and how, kind of unappropriate that was for the restaurant. And he talked about some dishes that weren't even on the menu. So obviously the guide wasn't even paying attention to what Massimo was eating. And so Massimo was terribly depressed and was thinking about closing the restaurant. But we all encouraged him, my mother, myself, his mother, to continue. And at that time, he really started thinking, he had just had an experience with Ferran Adrià. He had spent the summer cooking at El Bulli. And El Bulli really helped him liberate his creativity even more. And he started thinking about the most humble ingredients and recipes of the Italian kitchen. La cucina povera, which isn't a poor kitchen at all. It's just what you do when it looks like your cupboards are bare, but actually you open them and you find 3 bags of pasta, different kinds of varieties of pasta, some beans in the corner, a crust of Parmigiano in the refrigerator, and out of nothing, you make the most delicious dish you've ever made. That's the cucina povera. And so he came up with this amazing dish called la compressione di pasta fagioli. So a compression of pasta and beans. Pasta and beans is a classic Italian dish. You have some beans, you have some leftover pasta, you put them together, you make a simple soup, but it's one of those soups that from north to south, each has its own individual recipe and flavor. And it's something that your grandmother makes and your mother makes. And as a kid, you're just dreaming about that soup. So he came up with this compression of pasta and beans, where on the bottom, he incorporated La French cuisine, La Haute cuisine, with some foie gras, cotechino, and this kind of intense flavor. On the top, he put air of Parmigiano, this spuma that he had learned from the techniques of Ferran Adrià, how to bring lightness, how to sublime things, how to bring a little bit of irony into the kitchen. And in the middle, he had a classic pasta and bean soup. Instead of putting pasta, he cut Parmigiano very thin and boiled it, so it almost had the texture of pasta, but much more flavor, some radicchio, and basically between Alain Ducasse and Ferran Adrià, he had put his grandmother in the middle. And this dish was really what captured the attention of the Michelin star. And that year, we got our first Michelin star. And we're in a way on our path to discovering who we were going to become and the identity of Massimo's Kitchen, which combines technique, history, identity, the past, the future, never leaving innovation behind, always thinking of things not in a nostalgic way, but in a critical way. And that really opened the door for the last 26 years. And so that first Michelin star is what gave us the courage to continue and basically become who we were destined to become.
But the values, I mean, for instance, about the ingredients, cucina povera and so on, I mean, they were already there. And so when I see Food for Soul, a lot of values that you now trying to promote with this project, basically, they already started there. They were already not visible to the public, but they were already part of the way of thinking about food and cooking. So that's, I think, is really interesting.
Absolutely, Marco. And Massimo tells this beautiful story. I wasn't in Italy yet. I didn't know him yet, but his the woman who really taught him how to run a restaurant and how to prepare the line and how to be a chef in a restaurant, not be a chef in your own home kitchen, was Lydia Cristoni. And she lived behind Trattoria del Campazzo. And Massimo still to this day says that one of the most important lessons that he learned from Lydia Cristoni was the staff meal, the value, the importance of having your staff around a table before your lunch service, before your dinner service, and giving value to that meal, because you are breaking bread with the people you're working with, and you are sharing moments of stress together, but moments of joy. And I think Food for Soul, in a way, began there. It began at that table with the staff. At the time, there was a woman from Ghana. There was a guy who, part-time doing the grill. It was a very haphazard kitchen that he had. But to this day, our staff meal is still one of the most important elements of Osteria Francescana, and where we never talk about work. We talk about our lives, soccer, girlfriends, things that are going around the world. We joke around. Birthdays, there's a gavettone and there's always a tiramisu. That staff meal is pretty much the essence of Food for Soul. Because when we talk about our project Food for Soul and the refettorios, the whole model of the refettorio is bringing people around the table and the magic that happens when you share a meal together. So a refettorio table is a frattino table. It's long and thin. It's meant for people to be right in front of each other, so they actually do talk to each other. It facilitates conversation and the passing of bread or passing the salt. And we found in our projects, the first one began in 2015 in Milan, that people who didn't know each other, who were going through a very difficult time in life, let's remember that 2015 was a great migration, lots of immigrants and refugees coming into Italy. There was different languages being spoken, different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, and yet around a table where good food was being served and you were being treated with dignity, all of a sudden there was a sense of human connection, an opportunity for people who maybe are sleeping on the streets or just passing through Italy to relax, to enjoy the meal, and to once again have a human connection. And so it's around the table that we were able to share who we are, our tragedies, our joys, our even a moment of silence. But around the table, we are all equal. And I think that's the heart of Food for Soul, and why the staff meal in every restaurant is so important, because you can have the head chef and your dishwasher eating right next to each other. And if that doesn't happen in the restaurant, then there isn't that mutual respect that gets blown out everywhere. So oftentimes we're asked, how can you have a Michelin restaurant, 3-star Michelin restaurant, and then be running soup kitchens? You know, they're totally in contrast to one another. And I think if your ethics and your sense of value and respect for individuals began in our restaurant, it's just about transferring that to another project. You know, one is a transactional project and the other is about transformation.
Tell me two things. One is a stupid curiosity. Is the staff meal better than the meal served to the public? This is my, I always say.
That is a great question. So I'm always the one arriving late to staff meal. You know, they eat at 12 o'clock, sometimes at 11:45, and sometimes I'm in the office running around. So sometimes I just get the last bite of pasta in the bowl, or the salad or whatever's left over. Staff meal is delicious, especially because it's a way of upcycling all the ingredients that maybe don't end up in a plate in Osteria Francescana. So it could be your offcuts of vegetables, or your herbs, or the stems of something, or the peels of onions that then get turned into this amazing broth or soup, you know, some crazy broth they're making with passatelli. We have so much bread in the restaurant that doesn't get used during the meal. So then that becomes often a breadcrumb pasta, or a breadcrumb dessert, or something else. You see in the staff meal the transformation of all the ingredients, and so staff meals are delicious. Are they better than Osteria Francescana? They're totally different. They don't have, you know, the storytelling. They don't have the concepts behind them. They don't have the super techniques, but there's so much love into those staff meals. And staff meals are also an opportunity for all of our staff to sort of, especially the young staff that come on board, to take that challenge and say, okay, chef, I'm gonna make staff meal for everyone today. And maybe that chef is named Choi, and he just came over from Korea, and he's so proud that he's learned how to cook Italian food in Korea, that he wants to make pasta al pesto for 60 hungry waiters and front of house and office workers and kitchen staff. And Massimo says, Joy, are you sure you want to do pasta for a group of hungry Italians? Yes, chef, I'm sure. And you know how this story ends. Of course, you know how this story ends, because the pasta was overcooked. The pesto was instead of being raw, cooked. And everyone looked at this dish and thought, Joy, we have to go to work. And yet, out of that dish that turned out terrible came a recipe that we now serve in Osteria Francescana.
Really?
So the recipe is called pasta pesto in abstract, and I'm not going to go into the whole recipe. But basically, the pasta pesto that was totally overcooked got blended and turned into a miso, and it's this incredible conceptual dish that was created between Choi and Massimo and Taka. But that happened because of the staff meal, because there was this young Korean chef who had the courage to say, I want to cook pasta for everyone. Now, definitely Choi knows how to cook pasta much better than 3 years ago when he made that dish. And actually, Choi is headed out today back to Korea to be the head chef of Gucci Osteria that will be opening in September. We have this new dish that happened because of a mistake. So staff meal is a moment for everybody to shine, or a moment of failure. But that moment of failure that as a family, you have to embrace and find a way to turn it into a good story.
Love it. Tell me more about Food for Soul, and how does it work? Where is, last time I think I spoke with Massimo, he said that it was going to open in more places. I don't remember where, but who runs it? Is like Massimo going around the world, or volunteers? How does it work?
So that's a really good question, because one of the most important things about Food for Soul we can't be running around the world running these projects. So we always partner with agencies, organizations. The first one in Milan, we partnered with Caritas Ambrosiano. Sure. They're a beautiful organization. They're running homeless shelters. They're feeding people. They're helping people recover and find their calling, their jobs. And so Caritas Ambrosiano really embraced the project that we began in 2015 in Quartiere Greco, which is this working class neighborhood between different train tracks in Milan. It's kind of the end of the road. There is a beautiful church of San Martino from the 15th century and a theater that was an avant-garde theater in the 1920s that had been closed for decades. And so it was this opportunity to think about the theater of life and bringing light to the periferia, to the outskirts of the city, to bring not only food, but welcoming, and to offer the neighborhood an opportunity to volunteer and show how beautiful a project can be when everyone gets involved. In the beginning, at the Refettorio Ambrosiano, the neighbors didn't want a soup kitchen. Who wants a soup kitchen in their neighborhood? They were thinking crime. They were thinking homeless people would be there, lines out the door. And then when the project opened, those same people who had protested against it were the ones who were volunteering, were the ones that convinced us after 6 months of the Refettorio Ambrosiano being open that project didn't need Massimo Bottura anymore. It didn't need the great chefs coming in and cooking and showing their skills, because they had a recipe book, they had volunteers, and it was the volunteers themselves that were bringing forth the project. So from there on, every single project that we opened always had an organization behind it that could take care and run the facility. In Rio, it's run by a beautiful project called Refettorio Gastromotiva, and they have a culinary school helping those who do not have the financial ability to go to culinary school, to learn culinary skills, young people, people transitioning. And so the Refettorio not only serves meals, but it is a hub for education and for learning. And from then on, we opened, every single project was with a different organization. In Paris, we're working in the crypt of the Madeleine with a beautiful organization that is working with lots of refugees and immigrants. And so they are bringing forth the project and inviting chefs from all over. The artist JR is very involved in that project. And so he has been working with other artists and chefs in the neighborhood. Felix is run by a non-denominational church group. Then we have Geneva, which is going to be one of our next projects coming up. The most recent project that's run by a chef and a nonprofit organization. And this chef has always been thinking not only about cooking, but also about the social needs. Refettorio Harlem, which is our September project, and Refettorio San Francisco are run by two different organizations. Refettorio Harlem, we've partnered with Hot Bread Kitchen, which is an organization that for the past 10 years has been teaching immigrant women baking skills and channeling them into all kinds of restaurants, from fine dining to fast casual, and really putting them on the track of on a culinary track. And so once again, Refettorio Harlem will be for teaching, will be for engaging youth and serving meals. And on the other hand, in San Francisco on the West Coast, we're working with Farming Hope, which is an organization, once again, that is intervening with troubled youth and teaching them culinary skills and helping them transition and find jobs in the culinary industry. And so there's this double sense of not only serving a meal, but also being a place of education and being a cultural hub. You know, it's not just about giving someone a piece of bread or a plate of pasta, but welcoming them into a new community and bridging those communities and creating synergy. So
who can access, who can eat there? Is an open access to the...
It is an open access, but it's run by each of these organizations, partners with the city council and homeless shelters and social services. And so guests are invited. Guests are invited. In Paris, there's a kind of a ticket system where you're invited and you're given, come 2 days a week or 3 days a week based on your need. And so there isn't sort of a lineup outside the door, but people are invited in. And we really want to invite guests who are already inside of a social services program, because we know that then the meal invites them in, but then there are other services that we can offer them, whether it's getting a mailing address, whether it's looking for a job, whether it's just going in, having a closet of clothes to be able to change, or a washing machine, or San Francisco and New York are going to be very focused on families and single mothers with children. There's a whole new face of poverty in America, especially after the pandemic. And there's so many families in need that you would never imagine. It's not just the image of, a single man on the street who maybe is recovering from some kind of substance abuse. There are a lot of families in need. And so we're trying to reach out to them. And maybe they're the shyest ones who don't want to stand in line and don't want to be, too exposed to the public, especially their children. And so to invite them in is an opportunity to make them feel safe.
I like it. You mentioned the pandemic, Lara. What was the pandemic impact on Food for Soul during this year, if any?
Well, of course, immediately, all of the refectorios had to pivot. We had to change. We could no longer invite diners in, which was always been our philosophy, bringing people around the table. So how could we create that same sense of dignity, beauty, hospitality, when our guests are no longer around a table, they're around some virtual table? So we started creating meals that we could deliver. We started creating pickup stations, and in each meal that we were packaging up, always working with surplus food, we tried to add something that gave a sense of our caring, whether it was writing the menu by hand, whether it was a little note in the lunch. There's always an explanation of what we're cooking for people. I think that makes a big difference, because if you're picking up a brown bag and bringing it home, or you're sitting on a street corner and you get a little message inside, all of a sudden you feel that someone is talking to you.
Yeah.
And someone has cooked for you. And I think that's really important too. Last year we did about 450,000 meals with Food for Soul. That's basically taking 250 tons of food that would have been wasted or that could have been thrown away, and cooking it, transforming it into delicious meals. And that could be anything from a caterer giving some food that they didn't use, to markets, restaurants. Maybe they're giving us radishes that aren't so pretty, or spinach that's wilted, or meat that is about to expire that they don't want to have on their shelves. Everything edible. And it's up to our chefs and the creativity of our chefs to come up with recipes that turn that into something delicious. Take something that looks ugly and unwanted and make it beautiful. But that's the cucina povera. That's when you go into your pantry and you open it up and you're like, there's nothing for dinner. My kids are always looking in our pantry and saying, Mom, there's nothing in this refrigerator. And I said, you need creativity. If your refrigerator is full all the time, there's no creativity. It's so easy. But if your refrigerator is half empty, you see like the lemon, the Parmesan, the pasta from the night before, and you come up with something amazing, unexpected.
It's so funny, Lara, because last night I cooked. I cannot cook, okay? But a few months ago, my wife said, "Look, you have to learn now. It's time to learn." And I said, "All right, I got this," and I started to watch videos and so on. So yesterday I did the dish. I don't know, it was like chicken with mushrooms, something like that, and it was not disgusting. I mean, if the dish was disgusting, would have been already a fantastic result. It was poison. Like one of my son, he was almost dying, in front of me. So it was really disgusting. And you know what I did? And I clearly realized that I cannot cook and I'm the worst chef ever. I immediately blamed the ingredients. I say, guys, the right ingredients, and everyone look at me like, oh my goodness.
Chicken with mushrooms is really good. Chicken with mushrooms is delicious.
I thought, how can I go wrong? I mean, it shouldn't be so difficult. If it was like, I need pure poison. If you want to kill someone, you just do that dish. So I don't know. I have to study more. I have to talk with you and Massimo and come up with a solution.
Yeah, I think you have to come here to Casa Merluigia with your kids, with your family. Come to our kitchen. Come in the kitchen. Cook with the team. And teach you a couple simple recipes that you have for the rest of your life. Your kids will learn them too. I think that's one of the greatest gifts that anybody can give to their children is to teach them like 3 recipes.
Yeah.
3 recipes. 1, a really good dessert cookie recipe, cake recipe, simple. It can be made with anything. You don't need fancy ingredients. My son is crazy about chocolate chip cookies, and so he loves to make chocolate chip cookies. My daughter learned how to make passatelli, which is a traditional Italian, simple pasta recipe, breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, 2 eggs, a little bit of nutmeg and salt. Mix it all together with your hands. It's messy. You put it in a ricer, cook it in broth. It's done in 5 minutes. And that's something that she's taken with her everywhere she's gone in the world, whether she's in college or with friends or at home. So, learning a couple recipes in life, it gets you by, and it can even be pasta al pomodoro. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what, Lara? I always underestimated the huge importance that in a family has cooking. First, because if you know how to cook, you can eat healthy. So that's number one. This is a good starting point. If you are a kid and you know how to cook, you will eat healthy. At least you know what you do. Then if you want to, eat some rubbish stuff, sometimes that's your decision, but at least you know what you can cook. And the second one is also about the relationship, because if there's only one person cooking for 3 other people in the family, it's hard after a while, unless you are a professional chef and that's your job. I mean, so if you share, the fact and also the passion about cooking, is a completely different balancing in the family. So yeah, I really want to learn now, and I'm motivated, but my starting point is lower than 0. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, maybe you can learn with your kids. I mean, I think cooking gives you independence. My sister who lives in Colorado has 3 boys. One is in the 2nd year of college. One is in the 1st year of college. One is in junior in high school. And they grew up with her cooking all the time, this big kitchen. And now during the pandemic, they were all at home. And she basically was like, okay, guys, I can't cook for you all. I'm busy too. So each one of them sort of had a night where they had to make dinner. And it could be like a sandwich. It could be, omelet. It could be something really easy. But the more they started cooking, the more they sort of between them had this competition. And they were like, well, the night that this one cooks is better than the night that the other one cooks. And so it created this sort of challenge, the family challenge. And who was cooking the better meal? Was it mom? Was it, the younger son? Was it the older son? And so I thought that was really cool. And, we all spent so much time with our families during the pandemic. I have to say, I'm a little proud. So let me just say this. Alexa was given an award this Sunday here in Italy for being the director and the concept, the creator of Kitchen Quarantine. So Corriere della Sera Cook gave her an award for food journalism. And she never knew she was a food journalist until she created Kitchen Quarantine. But that Kitchen Quarantine, I myself learned so much. Massimo was never home cooking. I mean, we were always going to the restaurant to staff meal to be together because he was always in the restaurant. And so Kitchen Quarantine came along, and all of a sudden he was like cooking up a storm and making messes in the kitchen. And we were all learning from him. I never really knew how to saute mushrooms, talk about mushrooms until Kitchen Quarantine. And there I am watching my husband. I'm like, that's how you do it, and he was teaching me how to empty the refrigerator, get all the cheeses out, and how to make mac and cheese. Like don't follow the recipe, just see what you have and improvise. And so, I myself learned a lot from kitchen quarantine, and we never ate so well.
I can imagine. Well, what's next for Food for Soul? We have 3 minutes, but I was curious about what's going on in the next 12 months. What are the next projects there?
So Harlem, Refectorio Harlem is up for renovation. We hope by the end of September, October, we're going to open our doors. It's on 119th Street. It's in an old church. We are in the basement of that church, so it's really old school. It's in the center of Harlem. It's in a beautiful community. This church had a very small congregation, and they really wanted to reach out and do more for their community. And so they opened up their doors and said, the church is up the stairs. In the basement, they were doing some lunches. And so we're transforming the space and opening it up to the community. Hopefully, San Francisco will be running full-time in September as well. We're waiting for restrictions and the pandemic to pass. Geneva is a new project. It's going to be a build-out in a beautiful building. We hope for 2022. Everyone is like, Geneva? Well, who needs a meal in Geneva? There is so much need everywhere. Yeah. And I think Geneva is going to represent also a city that you never imagine people needing a meal or needing shelter or going through a difficult time. It's an opportunity for Geneva also to show its vulnerable side and to show how it can embrace this moment of fragility for everyone. And so I hope that Geneva becomes an example when people are going to the UN or going to visit or going, through a city like that, to come and volunteer and see that even our most pristine cities have need and that we can address that need. And so we're very excited for that project. We have something that might happen in Chicago, but that will be 2022. Okay. And I think the idea is not to build too fast, but where there's need and where there's the desire to have this kind of community hub, to also intervene and create what we can create. It's really about the people who are working there. It's not about us. It's not about Massimo. It's not about me. It's not even about Food for Soul, but it's about giving agency and voice to local organizations, helping them create a space based on a model that changes that idea of a soup kitchen being sad, gray, and ugly into something being beautiful, being about the celebration of life, being about vulnerability is not something that's to be embarrassed about, that we all go through difficult moments in our lives and fragile moments, but if we help each other, then we can all be better together.
How was the suggestion, I think, from your father to Massimo, grow slow like a tree, something like that?
Yeah, my dad was an amazing guy. I mean, he's the one who taught me how to write. He's the one who taught me how to be humble, how to think. He was the editor of Reader's Digest, and yet was like a normal guy on the street. When he met Massimo, he was very intuitive, and he said, "This guy is like a roller coaster. He's like a volcano erupting." And Massimo would always come back after we had opened Osteria Francescana, frustrated, no Michelin star. What am I going to do? And my dad said to him, "Massimo, grow slowly like a tree. Your roots will go deep. And when the time comes and the storm is blowing, you will be standing straight." And when my dad passed away in 2016, when he passed away in 2006, we had our second Michelin star. We didn't have our third Michelin star. But we put a bench in his favorite park in New York City, and it says, "Be like a tree, grow slowly." And I think that's the best advice I can give anyone. Whether you want to be an influencer on Instagram, whether you want to be a chef, whether you want to be an artist, whether you want to be, just grow slowly, because the growing part, the process, is the part that you're going to look back on and be most nostalgic about, because it's the most beautiful part of your life. It's not about getting there. It's about everything you learned along the way.
Laura, it was really fantastic. I would talk with you for hours, but
I'm waiting for you for the cooking lesson, so I can learn something too.
I'll get ready. I'll try to practice to be not completely embarrassing when we meet, but I'll try to arrive prepared. Lara, thank you so much. Good luck for Food for Soul and for everything. And I'll see you soon.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Oh, and I need the name of the ping pong table. Massimo said, I have my notes right here. The ping pong table to practice on. So send me a message.
I'll send you the message. Yeah.
Ciao. Ciao.